with my family. And it wasn't like that when I first moved into Oxford House when I was 28. But every year, I get the support and the love from my brother, Peter. Peter, raise your hand. He is also a man in long-term recovery. And we get to share some of this journey together. Although he never lived in an Oxford House, he is very supportive. So I hope that along your journey, you've been able to reunite with your family, not just children, but with your other parts of your family, your siblings, your parents. It's a very beautiful thing, and Oxford House definitely plays a role in that. So as we finish up, I could only think to myself as I was going down the stairs, okay, Paul. Pretty funny. Let's get 1,500 people out of the room in 10 minutes and back in. So I think he would be proud that we made that happen. So thank you, guys. Don't really know what happened, but if by chance you're doing something somewhere like vaping that you're not supposed to, could you please stop so we can actually have the convention? So, all right, it looks like the last few groups are rolling in. It is a little warm in here. Obviously, the air was off. It's probably coming back on. So we're going to get going this afternoon. We didn't get to finish a few things this morning, and one of them was a few more words. If you guys can settle down a little bit, we can get going, because I know you can walk quietly into the room and sit in the chair, right? Yeah. So, okay, thank you. I still hear people talking over in the right corner. Shh. Thanks, you guys. So I'm going to bring up somebody who got to work with Paul Malloy very early on to share a little bit, and Mark Spence, who most of you have seen on the 60 Minutes tape. He's going to share for a few minutes. Then Marty Walker, hopefully you'll be back in the room, and he's going to share for a few minutes. We have a few videos we want to watch, and then we're going to be educated, enlightened, and inspired by Dr. Gitlow. So Mark, you want to start us off?
My name is Mark, and I am a grateful recovering alcoholic and addict. I'm one of those druggies Paul talked about, right? I smoke crack. And my clean date is December the 10th, 1988. So I only have 3 minutes to speak, and been knowing Paul for 33 years. And first of all, I just want to say, Paul, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Paul Malloy helped change the trajectory of my life. I went to treatment for 2 weeks, moved into an Oxford House where people went to meetings. And I decided to do what they did because I had nowhere to live. And they stayed off of drugs and alcohol. And then Paul actually opened up a house 6 months later. It was on the Gold Coast in Washington, D.C., and had me and a couple other guys go in and start that house. And I got a feel for starting at Oxford House. And then I got a chance to meet him. The word came out through all the Oxford houses that they were hiring for outreach workers at the time. And basically looking for somebody who's not in a relationship, don't have a job, and ain't got nothing else to do. And I said, that's for me. So I met Paul Malloy, John Paul Malloy, and he was a character. He's a storyteller, you know, and he was telling this story about, drinking that Canadian Club. He made it sound so good that I wanted some Canadian Club. But then I got a chance to share about my crack, and he's like, I don't want no part of that. Right? And I just like to say to Jane and the family, because this is it's a family business, right? We're in the business of saving lives and family, right? And so Jane and family, thank you for sharing Paul with us. You know, for me and Kathleen and James and some of us that have been around for a while, this is incredible. What we see is incredible. I lived in house number 8, Oxford House number 8, right? And so this is absolutely incredible. I don't have a lot of time because I have to save time for Marty because he's really good at this. But I just want to leave y'all with this. In 1935, organization AA was started by a guy named Bill W. That I practiced those principles. In 1953, organization called Narcotics Anonymous was started by a guy named Jimmy K. Right? And I'm an NA dude because I smoke crack, right? But I did drink, but I drank high shelf stuff. But that's one of those not yets. And in 1975, right, those group of men in Silver Spring, Maryland, with Paul Malloy spearheading it all, started Oxford House. And I'm eternally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's have a round of applause for John back there, Kansas. You know, I did not sleep last night. I was trying to put to words how many people here in this room, let's see a show of hands, how many people here have never met Paul Malloy? Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. And if you do the math, eventually that's going to be every hand in this room. That's just the way it's going to go, you know. So I just, you know, I spent the evening in gratitude that I moved into Oxford House and I was of the genre that we got to run around with Paul Malloy. You know, we got to hear him speak at all the conventions. We got to hear his stories. All the time. The boy could tell stories. And one of my favorite stories of his, I mean, he's got a lot. And we heard him over and over and over. But my favorite story of his is, I think the guy's name was Charlie. And their house was hurting financially. And they said, why don't we go down to the bar and get Charlie and convince him to move in and pay his move-in fee, and he'll relapse and we can keep making money on his deposit. So they did. Charlie said, man, that sounds like a great idea. And he moved him in, he paid his deposit, paid his first week, and come to find out, Charlie was a big disappointment because he stayed sober. That's my favorite story of his. So I'm looking at a whole room full of Charlies right here, right? I'm glad they didn't play the video yet. So I had my little crying going on, you know. I wanted to tell you guys real quick what I learned from Paul. And you guys are here to learn that too. And our job as a family now is to keep it moving, right? We don't change it. We just keep these, I think there's 7 of them. And these were really critical because Paul was my supervisor for 2 or 3 years. And his main thing was let's get some damn houses going. That was all he talked about. Opening houses, even when you don't want to, it's the best way to create motivation and unity amongst the existing houses. By opening houses, by getting everybody together and say, we're going to open a house. You share a room. Hey, you want your pick of the rooms over here? So it just, to keep it moving, we talked about this as staff. We said, we're on a train moving forward. We're laying the tracks as we're moving. I thought that was pretty powerful. So we got to keep laying tracks because we're moving. I mean, look at this energy here. It's not going anywhere. It's moving. Another thing is no tyrants, no bosses in Oxford House. Everybody is an equal. You all pay the same amount of money. You have the same vote. The democratic process is our goal, and it's to be protected. No house manager, no senior member. I think they're going to talk about that tomorrow. Another thing is don't be in a hurry to move out. You know, there's no shame in living in Oxford House. Oxford House is designed to stay as long as you freaking want and to get your life together. I mean, you can stay the rest of your life if you want, literally. There's no time limit. There is no time limit. But we're going to start looking. Why haven't you opened it? You've been in the house for 40 years and you ain't opened a house yet? What's up, man? You know what I'm saying? Oxford House is designed for everyone. Everyone. It's something about diversity. Oh, yeah, diversify your house. A good house, a healthy house. And I learned this from Paul and James. A good house has old people in it, young people in it, black people in it, Asian people in it, Indian people in it, blind people in it, sick people in it. You know, because we're a family, and that's what a family has. It's not just people that look like us. They're the same age as us, you know, with a college degree like I want, you know. So if the other thing I learned from Paul is if you could just stay long enough to get comfortable enough in sobriety, your odds of relapse are nil, 0. Just get comfortable. Just stay long enough. Because with us, we always want to migrate back to what we're comfortable in. And for us to finally be able to sit our asses here in Seattle, we're comfortable. Well, most of us are there's probably some people in there like, what in the hell did I move into? What is this? And it's for you too, you know, get comfortable. Just don't use. And pretty soon sobriety, once you become comfortable, you start looking back and it's like, why in the hell did I live like that? You know? And that's what Oxford House, that's the gift that Oxford House gave me, you know? Because I tried to do it on my own and go to a meeting, and then after the meeting I'd be using, and I'd go to a meeting the next day. But once I moved into Oxford House and I surrounded myself with you guys, you winners, you Charlies, because I was a black sheep of the family. I think we all were, you know? That's where Oxford, we shine. We're made for black sheep of the family. Look at all you know? So that's awesome. It just, I can't. So this is why I stayed up all night trying to put this into words, because there is so much stuff, so much positivity. That's why you know that this is a God thing. You know it's a God thing. Look how far we've come. Look at the adversity that we've hurdled. You know, thank you, Steve. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Jason. Anybody that has helped create a house, stepped up in a chapter, anybody that's done any service, please stand up. Let's have a round of applause for all of these people, every one of them. Let's lay some more tracks. Let's keep this baby moving. Yeah, baby. And we're just getting warmed up. We're just getting warmed up. It is a new day. It's a new day. Paul's not a big huggy guy. Paul's not, you know, but I'm going to read a little poem that I found for him. This is his day. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Don't think of him as gone away. His journey has just begun. Life holds so many facets. This earth is only one. Just think of him as resting from the sorrows and the tears in a place of warmth and comfort where there are no days or years. Think how he must be wishing that we could know today. Sorry, hang on. We didn't want this day to happen. We knew it was going to happen, but it shouldn't have happened. You know? Think how he must be wishing that we could know today how nothing but our sadness can really pass away. And think of him as living in the hearts of those he touched, for nothing loved is ever lost. And he was loved so much. Thank you for letting me share.
The first, okay. All right. The first video we're going to watch is a video with some folks that really thought a lot of Paul and worked with Paul professionally and personally, followed by none other than Paul Malloy talking about Oxford House. And I think that is Jackson back in the room? Okay. Okay, I just want to make sure. James, is there, before we play the first reel, is there anything you'd like to say? You want us to go ahead and play the reel? Mr. McLean just got back in here, so we're going to allow him to share with us a little bit before we play the videos.
Hi, group. I'm James McLean. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Region. I haven't had a drink or drug since May 23rd, 1982. I had the distinction of traveling with Paul about 25 years. And I tell you something, I grew up, I learned, I got so informed, and I learned what it was like to really, really love somebody that you just met. Paul was that kind of a guy. And in our travels, I learned something about Paul that's really resonant there. Paul was a visionary. So on our trips, he would talk about stuff. 10,000 houses. A commission in a 5-star hotel. I'm saying, Paul, come on, man. You know? Damn, we can't do that. Who's going to let a bunch of drunks and drunkards come into their hotel? Man, we can't do that. He'd say, James, they don't know who we are. We're going to show them. And I watched him, and we had difficult conversations with different places. We had a meeting one time when there was a big lie told about a member of a house who was allegedly had an affair with a young kid in the house. And so this mother went around telling the neighborhood that we were a bunch of pedophiles and we was going to do this and we were going to do that. And we had to come out of this house. And they had this great big meeting in the library, and the mayor was there, and the chief police was there, the senator, the congressman, the newspaper was there. And everybody was there, and they was hollering, oh, get him out of there, get him out of there. And Paul sat up front with his legs crossed. So the man said, Mr. Malloy, why don't you just move? He says, we are not going anywhere. And that's the way he was. His love for the model, his love for the system oversaw a lot of things because there were a lot of times when we were together and I would be like, Paul, let's get out of here. We gotta go, you know. And he just was steadfast because he believed in us. He believed that we could show the world what recovery was about because the world did not know. He constantly said that to all of us. They don't know us. They don't know that we can be as well as not better than they are when we're not controlled. That we are different people when we're not using. And the whole you proves that. So Paul, I know you're listening because you're always going to find a way to find what's going on. I know you're up there looking at us. You made us go outside and wait a while so you could get yourself together. No, you did that. I know you did that, Paul. But let me tell you something. Your vision was for 10,000 houses. Your vision was to do all these wonderful things at Oxford House. And I thought about it today yesterday when I saw 400 and something women into the women's conference. I said, Paul, you know what? You never thought that was going to happen. I'm serious. But you're up there watching us, Paul, and we are going to show you that your vision caught on because you had a way of pulling us along with you. You showed us your vision, and we got it, Paul. And guess what? We're going to make it possible. Thanks for letting me share.
Paul Molloy could best be described as a force of nature. No matter his age or health, he was all Oxford House all the time. Paul gave me the marvelous opportunity to directly interact with thousands of individuals to whom I've dedicated my career, something I'll always be thankful for. He opened my eyes to the stigma faced by those in early and even later recovery. Stigma which goes far beyond occasional hostility at the pharmacy window and which extends into every aspect of the recovered individual's life. Now, it would be trite to say that Paul cannot be replaced, but it will be an uphill battle on which we will all work together to carry out his ongoing legacy.
What Paul did was move recovery into the world. He, in essence, said, recovery is something that must be embedded in the community. And he set about expanding recovery spaces in communities across the United States. What then followed on the heels of Oxford Houses and other recovery residences were recovery high schools and collegiate recovery programs, recovery community centers, religious recovery ministries, recovery cafes, recovery sports and adventure venues, art, drama, and music venues, and on and on. Paul challenged all of us to create the spaces in local communities in which recovery could flourish. For that, we say to Paul, rest in peace, our brother. A grateful recovery nation thanks you for your service and forever changing the world of recovery support.
In addition to these professional, remarkable accomplishments, Paul also developed many, many friendships over the decades, and I am privileged to count myself among the people who consider Paul one of their professional friends. Both his powerful ideas that he represented and the power of his friendships will live on. I will miss Paul, and I'm extremely grateful for what he brought to our field in terms of the lives that he has helped turn around and save over these last decades, and also for my personal friendship with him. I will miss both of these.
What impact did Paul Molloy have on my life? In a word, gratitude. My brother Matt lived in an Oxford House for 7 years, and it saved his life. My beloved wife, Judy, was an enthusiastic, longtime board member of Oxford House. I've always stood in awe of Paul's ability to write important laws, but the crown jewel was Oxford House because it was built on a very simple concept, gratitude.
You know, when he made a decision, he stuck to it. and he was always positive about it, despite seemingly things not going well. You know, he was like, nope, we're going to make it. And we did. And look where we're at now. You know, I saw Oxford House go from 12 houses to, you know, more than we can count now. And he last told me not long ago that when we get to 10,000, we'll be self-supporting by way of the house's contributions. You know, and I know that's going to happen one day.
One of my favorite memories of Paul takes place at the convention. In between the breakout sessions, when people are in the hallways, people are laughing and joking and taking pictures and making memories, Paul, right there amongst us all, he starts the 2-minute warning, letting us know that it's time to get back into the rooms. I'll miss that.
My favorite moment of Paul was seeing him in action at the World Convention. For the very first time, it clicked for me how much of an impact he had on so many people, helping them on a pathway to recovery. It was meaningful and moving to me to see the love in the room.
Just so honored that I've been able to be a part of just the vision, you know, Paul, the visionary, just things happening in the world and how far we've grown under Paul's leadership. So I am just so thankful. He will truly be missed. He's been like so many things in my life, you know, the father, the brother, the confidant, the mentor.
For me, Paul's faith in you today and our American democracy has been the spirit of Oxford House, a democratically self-run, self-sustaining, drug-free home. Starting from the first Oxford House in Silver Spring to over 3,000 houses today, we hope to achieve your goal for over 70,000 houses, and we're on our way. Your spirit and legacy lives on in every Oxford House resident, current and past, who have changed their lives by the chance you provided through Oxford House. Thank you.
We have to remember that Paul Molloy was very prominent lawyer in D.C. And he gave up that career to continue building Oxford houses, not for him and the men that opened the house with him, but for all of us. It's an incredible thing, an incredible vision that he had, and I am eternally grateful. His vision has saved so many lives, and we are all so grateful for him. I think about him every day, and I miss him. He was from Vermont, so he wasn't a huggy, personable person, but I know that when something hit his heart, you could feel it, and you could see it, and his heart was 100% Oxford House.
Paul was the consummate collaborator, encouraging us to pursue NIH funding to support basic research. When after years of submitting grants to evaluate Oxford houses, we were informed that only a randomized study would be eligible for consideration, I never thought that would be possible, as each house decides who will be accepted as a member. Paul came to the rescue and worked with us to get up the logistics for doing a randomized study, which ultimately allowed us to secure NIH funding for this research. This is one example, and there are many, where Paul was a model of how a social innovator can work collaboratively with academics for pursuing knowledge regarding social innovation that can make a difference. Thank you, Paul. You did make a difference.
Paul's gift is a unique gift to the world. Ours is to treasure and extend the Oxford House vision to reach ever more suffering addicts and to sustain them in early recovery when they are especially vulnerable. Paul lives with us, in our missions. We are greatly blessed by Paul and his noble life's work. I treasure the opportunity I had to know and to learn from Paul Molloy. Thank God for Paul Molloy, for his vision and for his life's work making it a reality.
His optimism. Paul could see the bright side of anything, and he did. But it shone when he talked about Oxford House. Paul was optimistic about his future, about the future of Oxford House, and about the future of all of us who work in Oxford House. Paul believed in what he was doing, and he believed that he saw and could prove that it worked. He was proud He was a proud person. Paul was proud of himself. He'd overcome alcoholism. His family had broken up. He put the pieces back together, and he overcame the alcoholism challenge and went on to become the leading light, the forceful person behind developing Oxford House as we know it today. He had a lot to be proud of, and he was unabashedly proud of himself, and he should have been. He had a great believer that people should be individually responsible, and that was the key to sobriety and optimism for the future. It's a success story in every sense of the word. I'm very pleased I was allowed to be a small part of it. Paul, which is Dizzy Dean said, it ain't bragging if you can do it. Paul did it, and I'm so pleased that I could watch it.
In addition to the leadership skills that I had seen in Paul, it gave me a sense of the energy, the devotion to Oxford House he had, the stamina, and the fact that Paul was a visionary. It was right in front of him. Paul was a visionary. He could see that this little thing that we created was something much bigger than any of us, any others of us could have sensed. You know, I knew I was going to do some fishing in my retirement, but I also going to have a lot of time on my hands. And this has given me a purpose, an ability to give back, to be grateful for what Oxford House had done for me many years ago, to meet and work with incredible people. And it's rekindled in me a real sense of purpose. And I feel very grateful to Paul, and I'm so happy that I was able to take him out to lunch one day and tell him just how much I appreciate what he has done for me at this time in my life. I'll tell you now, Paul, I love you. And I thank you. And I miss you.
My name is Paul Malloy, and I'm an alcoholic. Of course, I say to all my friends who had used heroin or opioids, if you had used Canadian Club in the beginning, you wouldn't have done that, because you would have thought you were in heaven and had gone no further. One of the things that we're lucky is that we landed in an Oxford House. My luck is particularly great because this person, Jane, that I referred to, as you all know, had me committed to a nut house in 1975. And as a result of committing me to the nut house and divorcing me, no less, I ended up on the streets of D.C., and from the streets ended up in the county-run halfway house, and thank God the county decided to close the halfway house, because when they did, that became the first Oxford House. In this business of this first Oxford House, we couldn't afford to run it like a halfway house. The halfway house in 1975 cost $114,000 to run. And the reason it cost $114,000 to run is that they hired a cook, they hired a house manager, and they hired a counselor. We couldn't hire anybody. We didn't have the money, quite apart from the fact that we were all so cheap. At Oxford House, we started out with a different purpose. We said, if you relapse, we're going to throw your ass out. In that first Oxford House, I didn't relapse because I didn't want to give the other bastards I was living with the satisfaction. I had lucked into a job while in the halfway house, and so I said to my fellow roommates, don't worry, I'll pay a whole lot. And they said, that's what makes us worry. You're already trying to be big boss. If we let you pay more than us, you're going to be impossible to live with. And so from the beginning, within Oxford House was a notion that everybody pay an equal share. And then they vote on whether or not to spend $12.80 to get charcoal in order to have a picnic next Saturday and invite a couple of other houses. And they vote, and Charlie doesn't vote. They say, Charlie, you got to vote. Are you in favor of us spending $12.80 or not? And Charlie votes, reluctantly. And it goes on this way for a month or two, and then there's a vacancy in the house. And Charlie is asked whether or not we vote yes for this candidate. And as a matter of fact, Charlie's life may even be complicated because there's 3 people trying to get in to take the same room. Which one do we vote in? And Charlie finally votes for one guy. The guy gets in. Now Charlie is postponing taking another drink or using drugs, not only because he doesn't want to find another place to live, but because he wants to set a good example for the newcomer. And it goes on and on and on like that, week after week, month after month. And I'll tell you, this damn sobriety stuff is habit forming. And I'm sure that all of us scratch our heads and say, what the hell is a controller? I mean, I created that job 43 years ago, and I still don't know what the hell a controller is. I actually envisioned Whit Holden, who was the biggest guy at the time, as being the controller, and Whit says, what do I do? And I said, if somebody doesn't pay their equal share of expenses, on time, beat the shit out of them.
Came to us and he said, 80% of the folks who moved into Oxford House stayed clean and sober. And Whit and I and John O'Neill and the other folks in the early Oxford houses said, my God, what are we doing wrong? We're losing 20%. And Splain explained to us, no, what we were doing was exceptional. Most places would be happy if 20% stayed clean and sober. Here was some system, some way, some scheme that ended up with 80% of the folks staying clean and sober. But it is only through Oxford House that we have figured out a way to live together for as long as we need to, so that we become comfortable enough in sobriety to stay clean and sober forever. So we become comfortable enough in sobriety to enjoy life rather than dread life. And Whit and I and everybody else in those early houses said, unless we can figure out how to have fun and make more fun, and by being clean and sober, we're going to go back to drinking or using drugs. And that happens right across the country. James and I were down in Wichita, what was it, about the 6th convention we had? I remember the poster was this girl running along the little brick road, and we were in Kansas. Of course, I also remember that there was a hotel there, and suddenly the tornado warning came. And the hotel says, get to your bathrooms, a tornado's coming. Everybody from Oxford House, of course, went out front to watch the tornado. So there are things that do not change even though we don't drink and use drugs. That Oxford House follows a model of being a very functional family. A family that cares about each other, a family that helps each other. This is how Oxford House really can expand like crazy. If some of you now living in houses will say, hey, why don't a few of us move and rent another house, we suddenly double the number of houses. Yeah. If every house did that today, instead of 2,214 houses, we would have 4,428 houses.
Each of you now living in a house, even if you only have lived there for 3 weeks or a month or 2 months, start thinking about, how can I help spread this idea? How can we rent another house? And there's probably all kinds of ways that we can do that Kathleen and I have never thought about. Now, some might say, why do we want to expand? For those of us in Oxford House now, we're all set. We've got a place to live. We've got the support we need. We've got the chance to practice this disciplined participatory democracy that makes each house work. We've got a chance to feel good when the group is able to pay the rent that month, when we're able to pay the cable bill that's got all those fancy channels on it. That makes us feel good. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But it will even make you feel better if you can provide that opportunity for other folks. Our family is a large one. It gets bigger and bigger each year. We are bound to have some tragedies, but we know that those tragedies will become fewer and farther apart to the extent that we make sure each house functions the way it's supposed to. That Oxford House follows a model of being a very functional family. A family that cares about each other, a family that helps each other. We're the folks that are going to turn our lives around because each day, each of you are doing it. We are also the folks who are going to make a huge difference when it comes to how this country deals with drunks, druggies, and crazies. And you don't even have to use those terms. You can be politically correct if you want. But it seems to me that drunks, druggies, and crazies explain who we are very well. I think too often those of us in recovery forget about the fact that the treatment for alcoholism and drug addiction is really a fourfold process. First, there's intervention. Then there's physical detoxification. And then there's treatment, which is really only education and motivation of us to do something about the way we're living. And then there's long-term recovery. And I know there are some houses here, I'm sure, who have converted the little old lady next door who bitched about Oxford House moving in by mowing her lawn for free. If you can't con a little old woman next door, you're not a real drunk or druggie. As Irish Catholics, we prided ourselves on becoming alcoholic every chance we got. And Dennis Glenn, in 1988, had 25 years of sobriety. And as a sober, recovering alcoholic in the FBI, Dennis Glenn had inherited the job of helping other folks who had booze problems in the southeast part of the United States who worked for the FBI. And so I called Dennis and I said, here's the problem. With Nkosi, he goes out to rent a house. He goes to the house and they say, no, it's not for rent. Dennis says, where's Nkosi staying? I said, Nkosi's staying at the Travel Lodge down there. He said, give me his number. I gave him his number. Dennis called Nkosi and said, Nkosi, did you look at any houses this morning? He said, yeah, I looked at the house on Harrison Street. Dennis says, I'll pick you up. Be on the corner. Dennis picked Nkosi up. They went to the house on Harrison Street. Dennis knocked on the door and said, my name is Dennis Glenn. I'm from the FBI. We're here to rent your house. And that's how we got the first house in Kansas City. We want to share our experience with more folks in society. Up until now, we've quietly gone about our business of helping each other. Perhaps as the next year comes and the year after that, we can expand our horizons so that we reach out and give the country at large some guidance of how we get our act back together.
I want to thank Jackson for his hard work and time and effort on that second video. You really captured Paul's spirit. And to everybody else that shared something. And I feel like I know Paul pretty well, and he would say about now, okay, that's enough of all that. Let's get back to work. Let's start supporting each other. Let's learn something new. And so with that, I'm going to bring up Dr. Stuart Gitlow, past president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and who has been coming to the conventions for years and really opens our eyes to so many different things about our disease, where we're going, how it's being treated. We're very grateful that you were gracious with your time today, even though we're going on a little bit later than planned. And with that, I will give you Dr. Stuart Gitlow.
Thank you. So Paul was a tough act to follow when he was with us. He's tougher now. Let me ask first, how many of you have heard me in person before? Thank you. All right, but the majority have not. All right. So this will be the same thing as usual. I'll mix it up a little bit for those of you who have been around a while. The first thing to think about is that 10 to 15% of the American public has addictive disease. And we know that with the right treatment, 80% plus can get better over the long term, can do well over the long term. So we should be able to be in a position where we have more houses when we consider the fact that only 10% of people with addictive disease are getting treatment. We should be able to multiply the number of houses we have tenfold and still have them be full and have an enormous impact on the American public. The other thing to think about is that I just said 80% of people can do well with treatment. But that's not what most doctors think. It's not what the American public thinks. Most people think that only 30%, maybe 40% can get better, because that's the number that keeps getting spread around by various domains within the recovery community. For instance, let's say that a famous Hollywood actress goes to treatment at a famous program on the waterfront somewhere. And they come out and they relapse and they go back and they come out and you've heard this story, right? Right. This happens all the time. The American public hears this story and they say, well, yes, of course, addiction, you can't treat it, only a few people get better. Because their thought is, that's what treatment is. You go to a nice place overlooking the water. It's like a spa, really. There are horses, and this is what it's supposed to be. Do any of you have horses at the house? In Arizona, maybe? No, no one has horses, right? And yet, horses are an important part of some of these treatment centers. That ain't treatment, right? So when these folks come in and these facilities say, 40% is our number. The problem is that then the medical community says, well, let's study something. Let's write up something for the medical literature. Some form of treatment, a drug or a modality of treating people. And we're going to look at this and we're going to compare, this is going to be our new cure for addictive disease. And we're going to take this and we're going to give it to all the people who come in, and then we're going to match a whole bunch of them and give them treatment and see which one is better. Except when they give them treatment, they give them the place on the water with the horses. They don't give them actual treatment that we know works in 80% of people. So when they say this either works or doesn't work, they haven't even compared it to the right thing. So that's why you see articles in the press talking about how this works for addiction, or this works for addiction, or this works for addiction, because they only had a 40% hurdle to jump over. If it works for 45%, oh, this is great. Never mind the fact that anything will work. A sugar pill will work 45% of the time if you're only looking at people for the first 3 or 4 weeks. Because you're going to come in, you're going to talk to me, I'll give you the sugar pill, and the talking to me will be something useful. The sugar pill won't. And you do it for a few weeks, and yeah, it looks better than the nice place on the water. It's no way to study addiction. And it's no way to treat 10 to 15% of the American public by making them think certain things. How many of you heard that story about drinking in moderation being good for you? What a load of crap, right? There's no way it is. It's toxic to virtually every organ in the body. How can it possibly be good for you? And it took 25 years from the time that original study came out for people to finally say, oh, yeah, we made a mistake. Yeah, it wasn't right. Right? So, you know, we have that situation. The situation we have now with cannabis is amazing. Right? We have a whole generation of people growing up thinking that cannabis is medication and therefore must be pretty good for you, and so I may as well use it because why not? It doesn't do anything bad. It's a medicine. More hooey. Right? So half the battle is the 10 to 15% of the American public with addictive disease. Half the battle is the fact the American public and the legislatures and the Congress have no idea what they're talking about with respect to what addiction is, how people with addictive disease can get better, and how people with addictive disease can be in long-term recovery for the rest of their successful and productive lives. And that's what we want to strive for, but we can't do that if we don't understand what addiction is. So, today, let's talk about what addiction is. First, let's talk about what addiction's not. Let's say we've got a 35-year-old steel worker. We'll make it a stereotypic steel worker. It's a guy. This guy comes home from work every night. On his way home from work, he stops at the bar where he has 2 or 3 beers. He's walking distance from his house. He walks home. He's not particularly intoxicated since he does this every day. He gets home to his wife. They have dinner. They sit, they watch a movie, they do whatever else they're going to do over the course of the evening. They get along fine. And he goes to work the next day. He sees his doctor for his annual checkup. Doctor says everything's fine. Liver functions are good. I'm not seeing anything wrong with you at all. This is a guy who drinks every single day. Does he have addictive disease? No. No, he doesn't have addictive disease because he has not been drinking despite his best interest. Nothing's gone wrong in his life as a result of his alcohol use. Now, it may well be that if we were to look at him at 80, we're going to find a slightly higher likelihood of his having dementia than he would have had otherwise. We're going to have a slightly higher likelihood that he's going to have heart disease or that he's going to have hepatic liver disease than we would otherwise. So he's not doing himself any good, but we wouldn't say he has addictive disease. Now, let me tell the story again. 30-year-old steelworker comes home from work each day. On his way, he stops off at the club. At the club, he does a couple of lines. Not saying what it is. But he's doing it with his friends. All his friends are doing the same thing. Could be coke, could be crushed stimulant, could be heroin, whatever. Then he goes home, has dinner with his wife, gets along perfectly well with her, life's good, goes to the doctor for his annual checkup, and everything's fine. Goes to work every day, not having any problems on the job. So this guy, who's doing a couple of lines, snorting it every day, does he have addictive disease? No. You guys get it right. The doctors I teach, they don't. They say, oh, the second one has addictive disease. Why? Well, he's using heroin. Are you kidding? The disease is defined the same way, independent of the drug. Doesn't matter what the drug is, right? Doctors don't get that, and the general public sure as heck doesn't get that. So when we talk about addictive disease, the first thing to think about is that the drug itself doesn't matter, and especially the legality of it doesn't matter, right? It wasn't that marijuana use was addictive disease in the US 10 years ago, but wasn't in the Netherlands, right? It either is or isn't, independent of legality of the drug. All right, the second thing to think about is, I told you that the guy who has the beers every day at the bar on his way home had 2 or 3. What if he had 5 or 6? Would that make a difference in terms of whether he had addiction if the whole rest of the story were the same? No. Correct. That's another thing you guys get, but the general public doesn't. To them, overuse, too much use, quantity and frequency of use have something to do with whether or not someone has addictive disease. But they don't, which you know, and they don't. So most of the public thinks, and I'm sure you've been here, right? You've gone in to be evaluated at some treatment center. And how often did you encounter a counselor who spent considerable time with you gathering data on when did you first use this drug? How much did you use? When did you start using it? When did you stop using it? And they're filling in this big piece of paper chart, all the data. And I'm always telling people who are new going into treating this disease, the first thing you should do is take that sheet of paper and rip it up, because it doesn't mean anything. The quantity and frequency and the drug name and what they've been using and how often doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with whether the person you're evaluating has addictive disease. They look at me, they're like, well, if it's not the quantity, how do I determine whether or not someone has addictive disease? And worse yet, how do I determine if they're getting better? Because what most doctors and clinicians use as the variable to determine whether or not an individual is improving is how much and how frequently you use. Right? Well, this patient's getting better. They're not having half a bottle a day. Now they're just having a drink or 2 a day. That's not better. Yeah, there are studies out there. If anybody wants to dig around in the literature, you could dig around and find articles that say this and such drug works. Naltrexone. Naltrexone works, not the one long-acting naltrexone for opiates, but the naltrexone Revia that they gave for alcohol for a long time. The reason why that works is, if you read the study, because the percent of days on which a person drinks heavily has gone down. Think about that for a moment. Let's say that you drink heavily 4 days a week, and now you drink heavily only twice a week. Did the medication work? No. Of course not. That doesn't work, because you might even be drinking heavily 2 days a week instead of 4 and drinking more. So it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even make sense. The numbers don't even add up, even if that were something to look at. So the percent of days on which an individual drinks heavily isn't an important variable. And yet, that's the variable on which the medical community assesses whether or not a certain treatment should be utilized for treating addictive disease. It's as if we said a diabetes drug worked if it brought the person's blood sugar down from an average of 700 to an average of 600. And normal is 100. Right? Unless there's abstinence and recovery, you're not better. You're not even starting to get better. I want abstinence as a starting point for treatment of addictive disease. So if somebody goes through detox and they get finished with detox. I say, oh, good, now we can treat your addiction. Oh, no, doc, I was in the program for 28 days. Yeah, you were getting clean, and you were getting rid of the withdrawal symptoms, and your sleep is finally barely starting to come back to normal. At some point in the next 6 months, I'll be able to really start working with you. For now, we want to make it so that you get through these next few months safely. Then we're really going to start to work. And yet, when people go to these 28-day programs, they get discharged. Just discharged. Not sent to anybody, not seeing somebody, not going on for treatment of addiction, now that they've had treatment of their intoxication and withdrawal, because the system is broken. The system isn't set up properly. So we need to go back and figure out what we're talking about when we talk about addictive disease. All right. Addiction works very much like other chronic medical conditions. Let's talk about diabetes for a moment. Years ago, a wagon train is crossing the American prairie, and on the wagon train is an 8-year-old girl who's beginning to experience the signs of diabetes, type 1, juvenile diabetes, where she's not making enough insulin, but the parents don't know that. All they know is she seems pretty thirsty. She's drinking an awful lot of water. They're stopping a lot so she can go off in the bushes and pee. That's all they know. They don't have a doctor. They don't know anything about medicine, because this is hundreds of years ago. And to them, this is a behavioral illness. That's what diabetes looks like if you don't know what's going on. Somebody drinking a lot, albeit water. So if that's all you know about a medical illness without understanding what the underlying physiology is, oftentimes they seem to be behavioral diseases. Well, we come to find out that indeed there is something going on. They figured out that the urine in these individuals experiencing these symptoms is sweet. I don't want to know how they figured that out, but they figured that out. They also figured out the blood in these individuals was sweet. And therefore, there had to be something wrong physiologically. Was it in the kidneys? Is it somewhere in the bone marrow with blood production? Where's the problem? And eventually, they figure out that the problem's in the pancreas. The pancreas is responsible for making insulin in the islet cells of the pancreas. Insulin is produced, and it allows glucose to be broken down. And when glucose is broken down correctly, you don't have diabetes. But if the insulin isn't being made, and you're not able to metabolize the blood sugar, then the sugar level rises. And you end up having morbidity, sickness, as a result of that. So the problem's in the pancreas, right? Well, maybe. Why is it the pancreas stops making the insulin? It's because the immune system is attacking the islet cells that produce the insulin. So the problem's not in the pancreas after all. It's in the immune system. And then you start to realize, wait a second, I know some people, some identical twins, where one twin has diabetes and the other twin doesn't. How is that possible if this is a genetic disease that is established at birth and that should result in the exact same outcome each time? And yet it's only 50%. Because even in a disease like diabetes, there's a combination of genetic abnormalities and environmental cues, something that triggers the genetic abnormality, the genetic predisposition to actually take place, so that the individual ends up with diabetes. We have people, Phil and Steve Mayer, downhill skiers. They won gold and silver in downhill, I think it was Lake Placid, many years ago. One of them has diabetes. They're identical twins. They're born 5 seconds apart. One has diabetes, the other one not. They both live the same life. They grew up in the same household. They went to the same school. They skied in the same races. They won Olympic medals side by side. What's the difference? Don't know. One of them might have had the flu one year or a strep throat or who knows what. Something happened to trigger it in one of them and not the other. All right. 50-50 in diabetes. Is 50-50 an addictive disease too? You take people who grew up in families where there's addictive disease, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of having addictive disease, but it won't happen to you absolutely. You've got siblings, some of whom have it and some of whom don't. What's the difference? What happens that makes it so that the genetics were off, and what is it in the environment that triggers it? What sets it off? Well, we can look at it by, will this show? Yes, it will. Wonderful. We can look at a normal curve. This is a normal curve, normal distribution. What is a normal distribution? It's a mathematical concept that basically means if I take a whole bunch of coins, say, and I drop them right here, most of them will be right underneath where I drop them, and they'll drop off as we go on those two tails. And that's what this is. This basically means that as you sort things, there will be a greater number of people in the middle and a scattering that will gradually decline on both sides. All right. This normal curve applies to a lot of things. If I took everybody's body temperature in the room and then graphed it, it would look like this curve. If I looked at everybody's height, most people are going to be here in the middle. I'll be at one end, some other very tall people will be at the other end, and that'll be the way that works. IQ, same thing, right? A lot of things are distributed in this mathematical fashion. One of the things that is distributed in this mathematical fashion is something called stimulus augmentation and stimulus reduction. So here's my test for you. Let's say it's a bright, sunny day outside, really one of those glorious days that I don't think they have in Seattle very often. And, blue sky and the sun's bright beating down. How many of you, if you walked outside midday on that day, would absolutely walk out the door and put on your sunglasses or have them on even before you get out the door? How many of you? All right, got about a quarter of you. How many of you would not put on sunglasses? Absolutely not. We got another quarter. And how many of you don't care? Right? All right. And that's exactly the distribution we expect, right? Most of you don't care, but some of you absolutely would have sunglasses. Some of you absolutely would not. Those of you who would put on the sunglasses, you're over here. You are what are called stimulus augmenters, because the sun's the same. It should be the same for all of us, right? Except we all have a volume knob in our head. That volume knob is set to a certain level. That level, imagine it's a volume knob on a radio, that level is going to determine how loud the world is, how irritating the world is, how bright, how vivid, how annoying, how distressing, right? If you are the person who puts on the sunglasses, then you are a person for whom the world is more irritating than it is to most people. You don't like turbulence in airplanes. You don't like driving too fast on the highway. You don't like loud nightclubs. Because all of these things are sort of overwhelming and annoying. If you go to an airport and it's crowded and noisy, you're like, oh, I just want to get away. Let me find a corner and I can sit over here, right? That's the person who's a stimulus augmenter. The stimulus augmenter is a person for whom, if they can artificially turn the volume knob down, perhaps with a sedating agent of some sort, like alcohol or a Xanax, that'd be great. And if they can keep doing that and maintain that lower volume indefinitely, that would be perfect. And it's too bad. The drug doesn't work like that. But if it did, that would be great. All right, that's a stimulus augmenter. Stimulus reducer, on the other hand, these are the folks who don't even own a pair of sunglasses. These are the people for whom the world is pretty boring, pretty slow, pretty dry. You want to pep things up. You like loud nightclubs. You like the movies because they have the volume turned up pretty loud in the movie theater. You like IMAX. Right? The world's got to be big. You want to drive, you're driving fast. You're skiing downhill, you're going straight down the mountain. Turbulence in a plane is cool. It makes you go to sleep. That's a stimulus reducer. This person does not like alcohol. This person likes stimulants. Right? Now, here's the question. For those of you who raised your hand, sunglasses, no sunglasses, did the drug of choice match? One no, but the rest yes. Right? So this is the usual process in terms of, and this is a metaphor, right? This is a way of thinking to yourself, how can I identify the potential that I have addictive disease if I have never picked up an addictive drug? How could I try to tell if somebody has the genetics predisposing them to addictive disease if they're in a situation where they have never been given a drug? Wouldn't it be great if somebody came in to see me and I'm a pain specialist and I'm considering giving them some hydrocodone and I could say to them, tell me about your experience wearing sunglasses, and that answered the question as to whether or not it would be okay for me to give them the hydrocodone? Right? I can't quite do that. That's not really the way it works, although that would be better than nothing, and nothing is mostly what's being done these days. So what we're trying to show here is that there are measures and there are methods of telling whether or not somebody's brain is set up in such a way as to accept or not accept a certain drug. I know this holds true for me. I'm a stimulus reducer, for sure. Don't even have sunglasses except if I'm, out in the Arizona desert. Right? So there I have sunglasses, but otherwise not. I can't stand alcohol. Alcohol does one thing to me. It makes me nauseated. Just doesn't work. As I'm down here, turning my volume knob down is not going to do anything. So let's talk about what alcohol does and how it works, because we need to figure out the next step in order to see what we're talking about. Here's a chart where this is time 0, and this is the course of time. And we'll say that, let's see, we'll make that about 2 hours, okay? And here's a level of awareness, a level of alertness. This is your baseline. Up here is a sense of I'm a little jittery, and here's a point where you're feeling, I can't stop moving, and here's a point where you're having a seizure, right? And then down here, this is a point where you're mildly sedated. Here's a point where you're asleep, and there's a point where you're dead. All right, so we have the two ends, dead and grand mal seizure. When you have alcohol, or anything that is what we call cross-tolerant with alcohol, works the same as alcohol, Xanax, Valium, Librium, Klonopin, Halcyon, any of those, Sonata, Lunesta, Ambien, chloral hydrate, meprobamate, Soma, right? They all work absolutely identically. Xanax is just a really dry martini, all right? And, you can trade one for the other. When you have alcohol, any alcohol, wine, beer, booze, makes no difference. You get a 2-hour period of sedation. The 2-hour period of sedation has an amplitude, right, that is based on how much you drank. If you drink enough and don't throw up, you kill yourself. Right? That's what happens to the frat kids every year, right? One kid gets, overly intoxicated, gets thrown in the trunk of a car where he's supposed to spend the night, and they find him dead the next day because he didn't get the chance to throw up. But if you drink the way people tend to drink, then you're trying to get a little period of sedation. It takes about an hour for it to peak. And that's what you drink for. But that's not the longest effect that you get from the alcohol, because the human body works in a way where the brain says, wait a second, we were supposed to be here on this line. Something came in from the outside and pushed me back here, and I'm going to push back. The brain pushes back, but in a delayed manner and in a slightly slower manner. So by the time the alcohol is starting to wear off, the brain is still pushing back, and what you end up with is a second curve. Second curve is agitation, a little bit of anxiety. If you just drank enough to barely notice that period of sedation, then you won't notice the agitation at all. But if you drank enough so that you really felt it, you'll feel this agitation. Now, what most people do is they drink to maintain a level, if you know how to drink, you drink to maintain a level of sedation over an extended period of time. So you're getting ready for the party, and it's a couple hours before the party, that's when you start drinking, so that you're at the right point when you get to the party. And you drink a certain amount every roughly hour so that you maintain your level of sedation. And what you're doing is this. Right? Having a bunch of drinks every hour to maintain a level of sedation. You're never really drunk. Your blood alcohol level is not even particularly high at any point. But you're maintaining your buzz over the course of the evening. Each one of those then has that rebound period of agitation. But remember, they last longer. And because they last longer, they start to add up. And so what we get is that, where this level ends up to be greater than the level of sedation that you ever got as a result. So there you are drinking over the course of the evening, New Year's Eve, say. You get home, it's 2 in the morning, you say, thank God, I don't have to get up early tomorrow morning. And yet, the next morning, there you are. Why? Because you're right here in the middle of this agitation caused by the alcohol you drank last night. What's the one thing you can do that'll make you feel better at that point? Absolutely. Because what you're doing is you're bringing that right back down. But it's going to come with another one of those curves. And that's the problem with alcohol. That's why it doesn't work. Because inevitably, you end up having to fight this. That's why Xanax and Valium and Librium don't work, right? If you look in the PDR, the Bible of medication for doctors, there's something in there for Klonopin and Valium and Librium. It says so for all of them, right? All those benzodiazepines, they all say the same thing. Has only been tested for 8 weeks. Who here has ever had a doctor tell them after 8 weeks on Klonopin, that's it, I have to stop the medication now because you're only allowed to take this for 8 weeks? Anybody? No. And yet that's what they're supposed to do. Why are they supposed to do that? Because at the 8-week point, the only thing you're treating with Klonopin are the side effects caused by the Klonopin. And that sucks if you started out up here in the first place. Because remember, you take that normal curve that I had before, flip it on its side, and now you've got that. So imagine I take somebody who's a stimulus augmenter. The world for them is a place that is uncomfortable, a place that is too agitating, too anxiety-provoking, too irritating, too annoying, too distressing. And that person comes in and says, I'd like a medication to help me feel better. Or that person says, I think I'll try beer for the first time. Or I think I'll try a drink for the first time. And what will happen is they'll do that. And they will say, I think that makes me feel like everybody else seems to feel all the time. They're right. They are exactly right. That drink made you feel just the way everybody else feels all the time. And if that's your first thought on having a drink, you're in deep trouble, right? Because what's going to happen then is that drink will wear off and you'll go up there. And if you were uncomfortable to begin with, as you should be because you were at one end of the normal curve, now you're really going to be uncomfortable. So when we're fighting addiction, we're not fighting the way the drug feels to the average person in the population. We're treating the way the drug feels for a person in the population who is already at one end of the spectrum. And then they come in and say things to me like, oh, I don't have an addictive problem, I'm self-medicating. What you're self-medicating is called addictive disease. It's not depression, it's not anxiety, it's addiction. It happens to look like depression or anxiety because that's the emotional experience that you have that accompanies this discomfort. But the discomfort is addictive disease. But here's the weird part. Not everybody who's a stimulus augmenter has addictive disease. Almost every child of an alcoholic, though, is a stimulus augmenter, interestingly enough. But what is it that makes it, if this is the part that defines the genetic abnormality, remember I said only 50% of people with the genetic abnormality actually have the disease. So what's the trigger? What makes it so that people who fall on one end or the other end of the spectrum end up with addictive disease? What is it that makes it so that some people who are right here in the middle get addictive disease? What's different for them? What happened to them? Did they have a strep throat? Did they fall down and skin their knee once in third grade? What was it that made it so that they end up having the difficulties associated with addiction? And if you look closely at them and treat them over long years, my dad was an internist in the field of addiction for many, many years. He helped start American Society of Addiction Medicine 60-odd years ago, probably more. He saw patient after patient after patient, and after many, many years of that, he came up with a concept since borne out, which was that all of the patients that he had seemed to have had the same experience with their parents. And it was almost always the parent of the same sex that was meaningful. And the issue that they had with their parents worked something like this. I'll tell the story from a guy's point of view first. Guy's 6, 7 years old. He's going to play baseball with his friends for the first time. And his friends, are a little older than he is. They're barely willing to allow him to play baseball with them, but he goes out anyway. And they put him in right field. He can't really do anything wrong in right field. It's unlikely a ball will ever go his way in right field. He's standing out there. He's getting sunburnt. He's hungry. Needs to pee. He's already watched the airplanes flying over. Finally, he sees a shadow. Ball's coming his way. Drops near him. He's not sure what to do. Picks up the ball. It's too big for his hand. He tries to throw it, but he realizes he doesn't know where to throw it. So he sees somebody running. He throws it to the running guy. That was wrong. Everyone teases him. They make fun of him. They embarrass him. He feels ashamed. He feels a sense of having been shamed in front of his friends. They're never going to want to play ball with me again. I cost them the game. No, you didn't, but he thinks he did. and everybody thinks badly of him. He goes home, goes to his old man, tells his old man what happened. His old man puts his arm around him and says, yeah, that happened to me too when I was your age. Tell you what, let's grab some ice cream. We're going to go out back, and we are going to learn how to play baseball, how to throw a ball. You're going to learn the rules. This kind of embarrassment will never happen to you again. That's a good dad. It's not the dad any of my alcoholic patients have. My alcoholic patients have the dad who says, yeah, Tommy, you really suck at everything you do, don't you? That's the dad my patients have. Because when you have that dad, you are then taught something. What are you taught? You're taught, when I come to you, the person I'm supposed to depend upon, the person who's supposed to be there for me, and I open up and I share my emotions with you and I tell you how ashamed I feel and I tell you how badly I feel, I'm going to end up feeling worse. Right? You get taught that enough times when you're 5, 6, 7, you shut down. You don't want to share your feelings. You know that doesn't work. Right? If you're a little girl, right? You're growing up in a house where you're being abused or molested, and you go to mom. You say, Mom, this is what's going on. And mom says, yeah, I don't care. Or mom says, yeah, that happened to me too. Nothing you can do about it. Or mom says, you're a liar. Right? That's the mom my patients have. And they sit there and they say, I don't want to be like her. I don't even know who I want to be like. I don't have a role model. Right? So you grow up with these parents triggering what happens. If you look at families, what you'll often notice is addiction runs in families, but it usually follows sex lines. Right? If the mom is the addict, it's the sisters in the next generation who have addictive disease. If the dad has addictive disease, it's the brothers. So it's sort of remarkable to think that that's all it takes to trigger this illness. But think about it. If I had a group of people who were diabetics, and I look at them, and I say, brand new, newly diagnosed diabetics, and I said, it's an amazing thing. I could make it so this disease would not harm you. All you need to do in order to get rid of the dietary requirements, in order to get rid of the insulin pump, in order to get rid of checking your blood sugar every few hours all day long, all you need to do is go to a group of people and stand up and say, hey, my name's Stu, I'm a diabetic, and share with them for a little bit every day and get a sponsor to talk to about it. They would all jump up, run up, hug me, run off to the next Diabetics Anonymous meeting. They wouldn't give it a second thought. And yet I look at my patients with newly diagnosed addictive disease. I say, I can make it so this disease, this terrible disease that you have, won't harm you at all. All you need to do is work a program where you're going into a room and sharing your feelings with a group of people. They're like, whoa, stop right there. Go into a room, share my feelings with other people. Are you joking? Not on a bed. Or they say, yeah, I went to the meeting. It didn't work. Yeah, where did you go exactly? Well, the meeting was in the church. I saw it. I was across the street. Yeah, I'm like, did you go in? No. All right, I went in. Where'd you sit? In back. When did you get there? After the meeting started. When did you leave? Before it ended. That's not going to the meeting. I want you to actually go to the meeting. It means sitting up front, raising your hand, talking to people, sharing, staying afterwards, having coffee with the group, help put the chairs away. I want you to actually work the meeting. It takes a long time to get there, right? Why does it take such a long time to get there? Because of the fact that you were trained from being a little kid not to do what those meetings require you to do. That's what's so hard about it. And that's what makes it so that the folks who are up here or down here and are genetically predisposed to have addictive disease get addictive disease. You have to have a combination of the genetic abnormality and the environmental trigger. The third thing you need to have is a culture that promotes the use of illicit or licit addictive substances in order to achieve a beneficial goal. right? We live in a world in which you're supposed to drink. You're supposed to drink it at funerals. You're supposed to drink at wakes. You're supposed to drink at celebrations, at weddings, at graduations. Whatever it is, you're supposed to use a drug. That's what the commercials all say. The commercials also seem to imply that you will be sexually successful by doing so. It's remarkable. So, what else is going to stimulate a 15 or 16-year-old than the fact that, by doing that, yep, you will. That's what it says. Right? So, and then, of course, everything ties in together. So you sit there and, the other thing that people don't like to talk about is how much drugs and sex have to do with one another. Right? How many doctors have spoken to you about whether, as you've entered recovery, your sexual dynamic has changed in some way? Has that been addressed? Would it be useful for it to be addressed? Right, because there's a connection between the two. And that connection is often an obstacle to getting better, but no one's willing to really talk about it because we live in a culture that doesn't really want to talk about it, unless, of course, they're advertising something like alcohol, in which case they talk all about it. And we live in a culture where the idea, the concept is that if a drug does not hurt the majority, it's acceptable. That's what we're going through right now with marijuana. Why are we moving? Let me back up. 100 years ago, we had prohibition of alcohol. And you may say, well, that was a big failure. It was the biggest public health success America had ever had. We dropped the per capita use of alcohol by more than 50%. The alcohol-related morbidity and sickness dropped by 66%, two-thirds, because of prohibition. Yes, crime was up in certain domains. Could easily get rid of that by just decriminalizing, but let's ignore that. So politically it was a failure, but from a health perspective it was an incredible success. When prohibition ended, it took a full generation for the per capita use to go back to where it had been and for the sickness related to alcohol to go back to where it had been. A whole generation, because a generation had grown up not thinking of alcohol as something typical, as something that should be done. What we're going through with marijuana right now is the same thing. We're ending prohibition, right? It's happening. And as that happens, we will see over the course of a generation that per capita use will rise and the secondary morbidity due to the drug will rise as a result. It's the same experiment. We're doing what we did with alcohol 100 years ago, except we're doing it with pot. And as we do it, with cannabis, we are going to end up in the same situation. And what people typically say back to me at that point is, yeah, but marijuana is not that big a deal. And, what they're thinking of, I don't know, is their dad or grandpop's, marijuana back in Vietnam. And that's not what we've got right now. What we've got right now has a much higher THC content. It can be condensed into waxes and dabs and has, psychedelic properties. And so 1-2% of people who use it end up with psychotic diseases long term, even if they stop using it. And so we sit there and we say to ourselves, 1-2%, that's not very much, until you start to consider how many people are using it and the fact that the number of people using it as it becomes legalized is going to double. So we're actually doubling the number of people who are going to end up with these secondary morbidities due to marijuana use. Did anybody here start their drug use with marijuana? Yeah, so there's a relationship here, right, where it contributes to the whole process, and yet people don't see that. What I want us to do as a culture is to move in a direction like we did with seatbelts. Most of you will not, at some point, get thrown through the windshield of a car in an accident. We didn't set up seatbelt laws to protect the majority. Seatbelt laws are there to protect the minority who would otherwise have been injured. Why aren't we protecting the minority who would be injured by substance use? Why is it that we're allowing drugs to be out there independent of the degree to which they can cause harm? So we live in a culture that is promoting substances, that is promoting their use, that is industrializing and profiting from their use. And they're only making it so that we're going to need even more Oxford houses than we would have otherwise because of the direction things are going. So addictive disease is a 3-building block concept: a genetic abnormality, a predisposition that is then triggered by an environmental event, typically in the family, in a culture that promotes the use of substances for purposes of self-enhancement. That's what it takes to make this disease. We can treat it through any of 3 ways because there are 3 building blocks. Going in reverse order, the social issue could be addressed by changing the laws for the better rather than for the worse, going in the right direction in terms of availability of certain drugs in certain places. The second way of approaching it would be, how do we deal with the family trigger that took place? That's Oxford House, right? That's 12-step. That's working together to be reparented, to relearn how to be part of a family, or to learn for the first time how to be part of a family, right? And the first one, this abnormality, if I had a drug that would fix this, that'd be great. I don't. There is no such thing. The only drug that comes close, there's actually 2, and it only works for the people with opiate use disorder, and that's methadone and Suboxone. It is replacing one drug with another, but it's replacing a drug that has negative results associated with its use with a drug that does not really have negative results associated with its use if used properly. So what those drugs are meant to do, Suboxone especially, is fix this so that the cravings are gone, so that the interest in the drug use is gone, so that the rest of your life can get back together. Now, I'm sure there are going to be a wide spread of opinions here as to whether somebody who is simply taking Suboxone every day and not using heroin or any other similar opiates is in recovery. How many of you would say that a person who's coming in to see me and getting the Suboxone from me and doing absolutely nothing else, but has successfully for 10 years been doing so, and has their life back and is married and has a running car and a job and a home, how many people say that person is in recovery? All right, that's more hands than I've seen in the past. How many of you say that's not recovery at all because they're not really working the program? And we get some hands there too. All right, it's much different than maybe 5-7 years ago when I asked the question as well. So we're making some progress. I think they're in recovery. It's a different kind of recovery, to be sure. But it's one where they are no longer bound by their addiction in terms of how they're getting through their life every day. It's just a different way of approaching it. And it should be, because we've got 3 building blocks, and they're going to be a different combination of inputs that are necessary in order to treat each one of these individuals. All right. I am sure that I'm running close to out of time. Let me talk about one other thing while we're here, and that is the opiate crisis that we've got. It's not really an opiate crisis, folks. It is an addictive disease crisis. And if you look under the numbers that relate to opiate use, you'll see percolating under there a significant number of problems related to sedatives and stimulants. And if we were to wipe opiates off the face of the map, we'd still have a problem. It just wouldn't involve opiates. The way we like to think about this from an addiction medicine standpoint is we're in the middle of an addiction crisis, but it's not something that's new. It's something that's been around for, good many decades, right? What has inspired people I'm sorry to say, to look at this opiate crisis differently from the way they looked at the last one, which was in the 1970s, is that this one has hit the higher socioeconomic and the white groups. The other one didn't. And this time, the politicians are doing something in response. Problem is that they're not going about it in the right way most of the time, although some of them certainly get it. But we have a real disconnect among various congressional and legal bodies and law enforcement because there's a lack of understanding as to what addictive disease is, and a lack of understanding as to what treatment is, and a lack of understanding over how really to get to the heart of the matter. But with your help, we can educate these individuals. And I'd love to see a greater amount of advocacy from Oxford House residents as the years pass, as we're able to grow our numbers. And certainly the numbers should grow given the percent of the population that has this disease. I wish you all well. Thank you so much for being here.